Kristina, Keneally, thanks very much for your time this afternoon. So what do you believe this tender document on the Home Affairs website actually shows?
This tender raises a number of questions for Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton. He has been out there in the past 24 hours saying that desktop reviews of medical records by doctors in remote locations are simply not good enough. But here we have what appears to be the Home Affairs Department tendering for that very service to be provided to people on Manus and Nauru. And it's up to Peter Dutton to explain what this tender means. It's up to him to explain why the government requires these services and what do they do with these reviews. Is this, in fact, the way that the government is assessing people to decide if they should be transferred here outside the Medevac process? There are a number of questions here, and it's incumbent upon Peter Dutton to answer them.
Well, there is a bit of a leap there, isn't there? Yes, this tender document shows they want doctors to do desktop reviews, but not necessarily to then recommend asylum seekers be transferred to Australia on the back of that.
You're right, David, and these are questions that only the Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton can answer. What we do know is that the government already uses a desktop review of medical records when it comes to student visas. What we also know from this tender is that the Department of Home Affairs is recruiting doctors that specifically have to be in Australia in order to conduct desktop reviews of what they describe as complex circumstances for people who are in offshore processing in Manus and Nauru. Now, it's up to Peter Dutton.
But they could just be doing that, just reviewing cases that have been looked at by others.
Well, and that is up for Peter Dutton to explain to what end are they doing this review. Are they using this in order to determine whether or not people should be transferred here outside the Medevac process? What is the aim of this tender, and why is the government contracting these services? Peter Dutton has been out there in the past 24 hours raising a whole lot of suspicion and concern about people doing reviews of medical records, when in fact his government appears to be tendering for that very service. Now, let's be clear, David. Doctors reviewing medical records is something that happens every day in Australia. It is not unusual. It is a part of our health system in this country. What has happened in terms of the federal court decision was simply a clarification as to how the Medevac process can be triggered for people on Nauru. Nothing else in the Medevac process. Nothing else in the Medevac process changes.
But the difference is we're talking here about doctors recommending someone be brought to Australia, a refugee or asylum seeker be brought to Australia through this desktop review, as it's called. Do you accept it does change the way the Medicare law was actually drafted? The law says the doctors have to consult, either with telemedicine or in person, with the patient.
What this does is it changes how someone who is a person on Nauru can trigger the Medevac process. What it does not do is change anything when it comes to the minister's discretion and power to bar someone from entering the country or to reject their health claim. It does not change the independent health advice panel and their powers to reject someone's medical transfer. And in fact, the
minister only has limited scope, though, doesn't he or she, to actually reject a recommended transfer?
The minister has, in fact, significant ability to stop someone from coming here. First of all, on health grounds. The minister can reject the health request, and when that happens, it can go to the independent health panel. That independent health advice panel is made up of people like the Chief Health Officer, the Surgeon General of Border Force, and other people appointed by the government. In fact, that independent health advice panel has upheld the minister's decision to reject someone on health grounds more often than it has overturned it. And that shows that the process is working as it should. When people are sick, they are able to use Medevac to get the care they need. If they are not sick, they don't get to come here for medical treatment. But the minister also has powers to reject somebody on character or national security grounds. And this is why Labor has supported this legislation, because it ensures that people, when they are sick, when they are very sick, are able to get the medical care that they cannot get on Manus and Nauru. And it determines that the minister...
You just suggested the minister has the power to reject someone on character grounds. Is that your understanding of what the law says?
Yes, it is, David. And in fact, if you look at the power that the minister retains, it is a power to determine who comes to the country. And that can be on character grounds or it can be on national security grounds.
No, but OK, well, I've got the legislation here. It refers to, yes, the minister can reject someone on national security grounds as defined under the ASIO Act, and can reject someone on if they have a substantial criminal record as defined under the Migration Act. It doesn't suggest they can reject someone on character grounds.
Well, in fact, that is the second point is exactly what you go to on the character grounds. If they do have that record, they can be rejected. Let me also make the point, David, that the people on David,
that's someone who's been sentenced to a jail term of 12 months.
And let me make the point, David.
That's not a blanket character, bad character test.
David, let me make the point that the people in Manus and Nauru have already gone through a security clearance. And to quote no less a person than Malcolm Turnbull when he was speaking to President Trump, we know everything there is to know about these people, and had they come by plane, they would be in Australia. The only reason they weren't in Australia is because they came by boat. Now, if that is advice that is strong enough for Malcolm Turnbull to give to President Trump, it does beg the question: what is Peter Dutton concerned about? What power
but the US
does he
has
think
rejected
he doesn't?
a lot of these people. There may be some of bad character on Nauru or Manus Island. That's possible, isn't it?
And under the Medevac legislation and the powers that the minister has, if he determines that somebody is a risk to our national security or public safety, he has the ability to reject them. Also, David, when
but
people...
There seems to be a fundamental disagreement or misunderstanding of what the law actually says.
David, if you allow me to finish my answer... David,
okay,
if you would allow me to finish my answer. What the legislation does is it gives the minister that discretion and that power. That is why Labor has supported it. Let me also be clear that the government has brought more people here outside the Medevac process than through Medevac since it passed the Parliament. Let me also be clear that if a person is brought here for medical treatment from Manus and Nauru, they are here on the minister's permission, and they must be in a form of detention. And that detention is up to the minister to determine. The only way they could come out of detention is if the minister responsible for the Migration Act, in this case Ministers Coleman and Dutton, were to make that determination. So at every step of the way, the government has the capacity to ensure that people in Australia are not at risk, but also to ensure that when people are sick, and they cannot get the health care that they need on Manus and Nauru, they are able to do so. Now, Minister Dutton has been running around...
I'm not disputing any of that.
Minister Dutton has been running around for 24 hours now, claiming that desktop medical reviews are somehow going to pose a significant risk to the Australian population. What he needs to now do is explain why his own government is... in fact,
asking those
for
questions,
those very services.
Can I just come back to this point, which seems to be a rather important one? Your understanding of the current legislation, the Medevac law, is that the minister can reject transfers on character grounds.
Based on the section of the law you have read out, that is clear. The minister has that power.
But that is a limited scope. Only those who have a conviction in relation to an offence carrying a jail term of 12 months or more.
And David, as I made the point, people in Manus and Nauru have already gone through a security assessment. In fact, if they had been found to be...
been cleared.
If they had been found to be negative security assessment, Manus or PNG or Nauru could have in fact rejected them, and we would have been unable to send them there. As Malcolm Turnbull said, we know everything there is to know about these people. The government themselves have been bringing more people here through medical transfers outside of Medevac than through it. Now, if Minister Dutton really does believe there is a serious problem with Medevac and he wants to repeal it, then he needs to put up the legislation. He needs to put up or shut up. What he's doing now is running around...
What will you do? If he says he will seek to repeal the Medevac laws, what will Labor do?
Labor does not at this stage see any reason that those laws need to be repealed. The government has not put forward any compelling evidence as to why this legislation should be repealed. Labor supports the Medevac laws for two reasons. One, because it ensures that when people are sick, they are able to get the health care that they need, that they cannot get on Manus and Nauru. We are talking about people who've had kidney infections, recovering from major surgery, have spinal injuries, people who are facing life-threatening illnesses. We support Medevac because it ensures that they have an avenue to get that health care when the government has been,
but from what you've said, is there a willingness to look at any new evidence from the government?
The legislation provides for the minister to be able to determine who comes into the country.
Okay.
Now, this running around
said,
claiming, around from Peter Dutton claiming that desktop medical reviews, which his own government, his own department are tendering the services for right now, are somehow going to create a security risk. He has not put out the evidence to back that up.
Can I just come back to the question, if the government presents evidence, compelling evidence, to suggest there is a problem with how this is working, do I take it you are open to looking at whether the law should be repealed?
We are not open to repealing the law in absence of any actual evidence. What I would be open to doing is, if the government has amendments that they want to put forward, they haven't done that, David. All we have had since the days that this legislation was before the Parliament, the government has made the government has made false claim after false claim.
If that amendment were a blanket character test, some sort of blanket right for the minister to knock back any request,
David,
would that be okay?
The government hasn't even put anything forward except scaremongering. Let's not forget, this government ran around saying that we would have hundreds of people here within weeks. They reopened Christmas Island. They ran around saying there would be a flotilla of boats. None of these things have come to pass. Peter Dutton said murderers and rapists would be allowed into Australia. When he was asked on the weekend on ABC if any had come, he said he simply didn't know. The reality is, David, Medevac has approved the transfer of some 30 people who need medical attention. The government, since the passage of Medevac, have brought some 50 people outside of it to Australia for medical treatment. What we are seeing is that people on Manus and Nauru are now getting the health care they need without going through court cases put forward by the federal government to stop them from getting that treatment. That is what Labor supported when it came to Medevac. We did so on the basis that it gives the minister the power to determine who comes into the country. To date, the minister and the government have not pointed to one serious or credible risk to national security or public safety as a result of the Medevac legislation.
All right, Shadow Home Affairs Minister Kristina Keneally. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.